Well, Clare and I were both elected in the 2013 federal election, and we both came in following in the footsteps of very senior members of the party, and we're both feeling their shadows quite acutely when we were elected. So we kind of gravitated towards each other early on in the piece, and then serendipitously we ended up being sat next to each other in the chamber.
When I think about what motivated me to go into politics, I often think back to my grandparents, who I was very close to as a young person. My grandfather, Louis, was a trade unionist who spent his life fighting for rights that today we take for granted. But he had times of deep poverty in his life, and at one point lived in a one-room flat with my dad in King's Cross. On my mum's side, my grandmother Clare, who I'm named after, was one of 11 children in an Irish Catholic family. She got educated up to about grade 4. So at the end of her life, she had no income, and as a result, not as many choices as I would have liked to see for her. The sorts of problems that you see in those lives are still present in Australia today. They look very different, but to me, my life's work is about trying to address those things in today's Australia and make sure that every Australian child has a chance of making a go of it, of having a good life and a fair life in this country of ours.
My wife is a migrant to Australia. She came to Australia from China when she was about 10. And I know that the political debate at the time that she arrived into Australia had an impact on her life and the life of other migrants in Australia, the days of One Nation and Hansonism. So that's always had an impact on me about the way that our national political debate, the way we talk about things and what we talk about impacts on people in day-to-day life, impacts on children. So multiculturalism is particularly important to me in that respect, as a form of social inequality, as a vanguard against social inequality.
I think one of the reasons why Tim and I struck up a bit of an immediate friendship was because we've both come into Parliament from slightly different to the usual route. So Tim and I have both worked in business for quite a long time. We've both studied public policy overseas, Tim at the LSE and me at Harvard. We've both got really young families, so we're having this similar experience of having to go away from our partners and kids, which can be really, really unpleasant, to be perfectly frank.
There's nothing to focus the attention on what really matters, like walking out the door 22, 23 weeks a year, saying goodbye to your family and your young kids. To make that kind of sacrifice worthwhile, you need to be doing something that's really going to matter over the long term.
One of the reasons that we decided to write a book, Two Futures, is because there's not really a mechanism for you to do much long-term thinking in politics. So the short-term pushes and incentives are there every single day. You've got people calling you, wanting to give comment on this and, be in this media conference or give this speech in Parliament. So it's always the things that are not just happening next week, but later on that day or even in an hour. And we needed some discipline, so that's why we decided to write Two Futures.
We applied it a little bit, a bit of a similar strategy that we would have in the private sector, I suppose. We got out the matrix and thought, what's going on? What can we see now that's happening that's going to really matter in 20 years' time? And we sifted through them and applied a little bit of subjectivity and came out at the end of it with 6 key themes that we think are really going to shape our next 20 years. And those themes that we write about in the book, the health of our democratic institutions, number 1, growing trends towards inequality in our society, number 2, the digital revolution, the way that technology is changing our society and our way of life, climate change, the impacts that will have on our economy, growth, where new sources of growth are coming from in our country over the coming decades, and finally Australia's place in the world, particularly within our region, the Indo-Pacific. So with that framework, we then sort of allocated tasks within the themes and set off in a very painful process of writing a book.
And I think when Tim and I sat down and talked about the sort of book that we were trying to write, we made a really clear decision that we didn't want to write an academic book about public policy, that we felt that probably few people, or at least a kind of coterie of insiders, might be the only readers. We wanted to write a book for the general public, especially, as Tim said, for young people, because we want people to talk about public policy in Australia. Politics is not about As Tim has mentioned, it's not about Tony Abbott eating an onion or any of these sort of
weird,
silly... It was really weird. But these are sort of silly and colourful things that happen. I don't mind that they get reported, but I still want people to understand that, you know, to me and Tim, that is not what politics is about. Politics is about ideas, and it's about a discussion of where our nation is going. And I hope that the book stimulates that for, you know, for many Australians, not just a few.